Welcome back, everyone, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am Jesse Collings, joined as always with my co-host, Jason Ounpraseuth. Jason, how's it going?
It's going well. This week was Lunar New Year, and just celebrating that. Pretty low key this year, obviously, with COVID going on, but it's getting better each and every week. Fingers crossed with that at least. But yeah, but again, we talked about this before when we first started. There's the ice storm going on, and so hopefully everyone is doing okay with that.
Yeah, we're having quite the weather week here in New England, as to be expected in January and February. We got about I got about 18 inches of snow last on over the weekend. I'm assuming you got a little bit less based on location.
Yeah.
And now we're getting some sort of horrible ice storm where they're basically telling everyone do not drive under any conditions. And I was outside for like a minute today moving my car into my driveway, and I almost like felt like I was like going to die. So is the Lunar New Year, is that different than Chinese New Year, or is it Chinese New Year? Can you explain that to plebes like me?
It's basically the same thing. I'm half Vietnamese, and so with like influences that China's had on Vietnam, it's basically the same thing. So yeah, Lunar New Year, Chinese New Year, Vietnamese New Year, it's basically all the same thing.
So that's celebrated throughout like Southeast Asia.
At least Vietnam and
Mhm.
China, and I think Korea is like they mixed in with that as well.
No, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I knew like because I know you're not Chinese. But I've heard it, referenced kind of as a broader term, like Lunar New Year, instead of using the term Chinese New Year. Um,
Yeah.
so no, that's cool. So hopefully this year for you is better than last year. I don't know. My last year was okay. I mean, obviously with pandemic, so I don't know how everyone is doing. Um, but we're here today kind of to talk about the last year. And what I wanted to do was talk about the Voices of Wrestling 2021 top 100 matches breakdown. And so this is something that Voices of Wrestling, a website, voicesofwrestling.com, for anyone that doesn't know, that I'm a contributor on. Jason, have you ever contributed something to Voices of Wrestling before?
No, I haven't.
No, but you voted in this before.
I did the not this year, but the year previous. I did vote in it.
Yeah. So Voice of Wrestling. So basically what they do with this top 100 matches is they send out ballots or links to ballots to registered members of the wrestling media. And the standard's not super high. It's not like only 10 people get it. It's not like, Dave Meltzer and Wade Keller and Sean Ross Sapp. It's anyone, if you have a platform, if you have a podcast, a YouTube channel, you write, anything to kind of do with pro wrestling media coverage, you're eligible for a ballot. And so you get one and you list your top 10 matches of 2021 or whatever year you're voting in. And basically, it's very simple. If you vote for a match in 10th place, it gets 1 point. If you vote for a match in ninth place, it gets 2 points, and all the way up to your number one match getting 10 points. And so they take the results of that, whatever matches have the highest scores get ranked, 1 to 100, and there's your top 100 list. And so this started out, I think only 4 people voted like a number of years ago when it first started out. And since then, it's kind of blossomed into this like really incredible collection of opinions and independent thoughts. And this ended up having 136 different voters. Oh no, I had more than that. Sorry, I'm reading the wrong figure. We had 176 different voters this year. And one of the cool things is because of the internet and because of social media and how people are able to connect, this wasn't just like Americans and Canadians and like a few British people. There's 17 different countries represented. We had voters from Kuwait, the Philippines, Thailand, Finland, so Brazil, Turkey. It really does capture it tries to capture as big of an umbrella of professional wrestling as possible. And what ends up getting is a really fascinating list because people all kind of have their own agendas when it comes to voting. Some people only watch one promotion and they'll vote for 10 matches from that one promotion. They might vote 10 WWE matches, 10 AEW matches, 10 Stardom matches, whatever you can. Some people try to watch everything and they'll vote from everything. Some people will vote, what they actually think the top 10 matches, their very 10 best favorite matches are, or some people will vote strategically. Some people will vote for, one match from different promotions, or they don't want to vote for the same wrestler twice. Some people, will vote because they want to get if they're fans of a smaller promotion and they want to get attention on that smaller promotion. So they'll put maybe like a smaller Joshi match number one to hope it, kind of boost it up in the rankings. So people who don't watch it will, see it on the list and say, I haven't seen that match and seems to have finished really high. Maybe I'll see it. And that's kind of what this thing is. It's kind of a guide almost to see what people are watching and what wrestling fans are interested in. And it's trying to do the best at casting a wide umbrella without turning it over to just a general public poll, because you can't really do it like that. You can't just have, all the readers vote, because what will end up happening is the promotions that have the most fans, or the people who are reading the most about it, will probably end up doing the best, as opposed to restricting it to kind of media gives it a little bit more credibility as far as not just playing a popularity contest, because this is not a popularity contest, even though it's a poll. It's about identifying the best quality of something. And that's what I think ultimately makes this thing so fascinating. And we'll get into the list and talk about how different everything is, and the variety of promotions that are represented quite highly on the list. Jason, you've had a chance to look at the list, and I will put a link to the list in the description. If anyone has trouble finding it, it's right on voiceofwrestling.com. Also you can find all the information. You can find out the list of voters. You can find out every match that got a vote, because there's 100 matches, but every match that got a vote is listed. I think there's 310 matches in total listed that got at least one vote this year. So you can check all that out on the Voice of Wrestling website. And I'm going to share my screen, or at least attempt to share my screen when we talk about it, so you guys can visualize, what we're talking about. But Jason, for you, what was kind of like your reaction to the list as a whole for 2021?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, this whole voting process, like it's ranked choice voting. So obviously, yeah, there is a strategic aspect to it for members of the media, but also, yeah, like, you can vote for whatever promotion you want. And I think, getting those different opinions is very valuable to see, like, okay, which, what kind of wrestling is more popular amongst, a general media audience, for people who are watching. And yeah, it's very interesting to see, like, the development of, I guess, Joshi wrestling amongst, voters. I think every year you've seen at least one Joshi match, rank higher and higher in each list. And obviously we saw this year, number 5 was the Shuri and Utami match, which was, pretty incredible to see after, just seeing the, development of Stardom. And it sort of does, why we sort of wanted to do this episode is to see the trends that are popping up in wrestling. And it really is that, just seeing different promotions get, more of a shine, and just seeing them more develop in terms of having quality matches. Of course, it's not meant to be a popularity contest, but popular promotions tend to do pretty well, since AEW is on television, national television, and so it definitely lends towards that. And that's what we saw this year with another AEW match being number 1. Interestingly, another AEW tag match being number 1. Young Bucks, very controversial in terms of their, I guess, legacy in terms of wrestling history. I think it's mostly because they're still active that I think people are very hesitant to call them the best tag team of all time. They're definitely in that conversation, in my opinion. I think, very much those who have a strong opinion in the wrestling world tend to agree with that as well. But I think, people definitely hesitate when they want to call a current active, talent or wrestler the best whatever of all time. And so I think that's sort of interesting to look at here in terms of, the amount of people who vote for, these top matches.
Yeah, and for the Young Bucks, so they finished number one this year. Of course, Young Bucks versus Lucha Brothers, their cage match from All Out was voted
Yep.
number one. This is the second straight year the Young Bucks have won this award. They finished number one in 2020 with the Hangman Page versus Kenny Omega, or Hangman Page and Kenny Omega match
Yep.
from Revolution in 2020. And so obviously, yeah, I mean, we're getting enough data, and we can go into that maybe a little bit later because there's been some articles written about kind of breaking down the data of different things. But this has been going on since I think 2014, and we're starting to see a track record of, you know, who's finishing the highest year over year, and what does that say about a person. It's just kind of interesting data. I mean, when it comes down to like the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame, and when people start talking about like real greatness and how can we quantify that in wrestling, which you really can't outside of using some sort of types of drawing metrics. But looking at things like how many times they won this kind of poll, how well they've placed year over year in the poll, and how many matches that they've had in a poll like this, kind of can help paint a picture and work an argument if you're interested in saying that, you know, like you might think the Young Bucks suck, but obviously collectively, you know, we have this poll of over 100 people voting, and they're watching wrestling all over the world and watching wrestling that's very big and wrestling that's very small, and the Young Bucks coming out on top of those things. I think it is relevant. So yeah, this was number one. This was not my number one. I voted for another match in the top 10, which we'll get into. Jason, you did not vote this year, but did you have a match of the year last year?
I think just for my personal opinion, I would have given the Shuri Utami match number one, just for my personal feelings of, you know, just watching wrestling and the type of wrestling I like to watch. Definitely, you know, top three for me for this Lucha Brothers Young Bucks match. But for me personally, I would have had the Shuri Utami match number one in terms of my favorite for what I consider, you know, the match of the year.
Yeah, definitely. I had that match in my top 10 as well when I came to voting. And like you said, it finished very high. If you can scroll down, it has the whole top 10, I believe, on this window.
Yeah, I think it was interesting when you look at the total votes, the number one match didn't get the most votes overall. It was I believe it was the Danielson Omega match that had the most votes, but that finished number two. And so that's kind of interesting that it did get the number two match didn't get enough first place votes to really go above it, but it still had the most votes overall ahead of this Young Bucks Lucha Brothers match. So that's kind of an interesting way how the voting played out in terms of the placements everyone had for the top two matches of this list.
Yeah, and that kind of shows, like we talked about the Young Bucks being polarizing, that, you know, what that shows is that some people left the Young Bucks off of their ballot entirely. And that was countered by people ranking that Young Bucks match, you know, number one or number two, and it accumulating a lot of, you know, points based off of its high ranking. So you have so you kind of have that some people voting, you know, I hate the Young Bucks, I'm not putting them in my top 10, and other people being, I love the Young Bucks so much, I'm making them number one because this match was awesome. Kind of shows how they are. Now, granted, number two, Kenny Omega and Bryan Danielson. Kenny Omega is not necessarily unpolarizing as a talent, and you'll definitely have some people who will dismiss him. But I think there's, especially like the hardcore fan community, I think there's more pushback for the Young Bucks than there is for Kenny, because, and part of it is, I think Kenny having that long run in New Japan helps you get over with a certain segment of fans in a way that maybe the Young Bucks didn't, as more of a mid-card act in New Japan. So as people,
I will say,
no,
oh, ahead. Sorry, I was just going to add that, like, I think there is sort of that traditionalist aspect. I think it could be interesting to maybe look at a little bit more in terms of having a singles match ahead of tag matches. Obviously, we see this top 10, not a lot of tag matches, and I think maybe that could be it for a lot of people. They're more traditional. They want, you know, a singles match as their match of the year ahead of maybe a tag match, which is, you know, typically you don't really see highlighted tag teams or tag team wrestling other than, of course, the Young Bucks, of course, who's, yeah, they make it their goal to highlight tag team wrestling, which is, you know, part of why, you know, tag matches are always, you know, they tend to be in the main event sometimes for Dynamites.
Yeah, well, you talk about the major promotions, you know, WWE, a tag team match is probably not going to finish high in the top 10. They have finished high in the past with, like, when NXT had a really good tag division with, you know, DIY and the Revival and a few other teams. But WWE, you're not going to get that great tag team match because they don't value tag team wrestling at kind of the main event level. New Japan is a similar thing. They don't value tag team wrestling at the main event level, so you're not going to see that. You could say the same about some of the larger pro companies like Noah or All Japan. Dragon Gate, yes. Some of the Joshi promotions like Stardom and Tokyo Joshi Pro, yeah, they do a lot of tag team wrestling. But you're right about kind of taste. And you know what? That might give the Young Bucks and Lucha Brothers match kind of an advantage in some ways, because if you really want to represent tag team wrestling on your ballot and you don't want to just have a bunch of singles matches, then that's probably the match you're going to go for. And I think that happens when you vote. And I talked about this before, but with this year, when I came down to making my ballot, I don't think I voted for like my literal 10 favorite matches of 2021. I only voted for one Shingo Takagi versus Will Ospreay match, which was the New Japan Cup match. And the reason I voted for that one was because, and not the title defense that happened a few months later, was because even though I both had them at 5 stars, they were really highly rated by me. They were probably both in my top 10 in a literal sense. I just didn't want to vote for the same match twice. And maybe that's dismissive of the spirit of the ballot, where you should really just try to vote for the 10 best, because that's what we're trying to correlate here. But to me, I just didn't want to vote for the same match twice. I wanted to vote for a little bit more variety in my top 10 and not just vote 10, because there's been times where it's like 10 New Japan matches, and that's a credit to New Japan, but there's also a sameness to there, and I just kind of want to show a little bit more diversity. I don't want to say, like, if you were to say, like, what are my 10 favorite songs of all time, I probably wouldn't come up with a list of like all songs from one band that are or one specific very genre. It's not just going to be like 10 Metallica songs. Like, I want to show a little bit of variety, and you could say that with movies or anything. If you ask someone to name your 10 favorite, it's probably going to be a little bit variety into to what your favorite things are. And that's what I think makes kind of the list interesting. You mentioned like the Utami versus Shuri match, which was your number 1, and it finishes at number 5 this year. And you mentioned kind of seeing the climb that Stardom had, and Joshi has had over the last few years. Really, it kind of helps tell a story about, something that's becoming more popular, especially because this is still a heavily, even though, voters voted from all around the world, this is a Western list. Most voters are from the United States. Most of them are from English-speaking countries. So you're not going to get quite the kind of in-depth analysis as maybe if you were to do a list fully in Japan, but you see more Joshi becoming more popular with this kind of audience. And for a match like that to finish in number 5 is really impressive, because you look at the rest of this list. All right, it's AEW, it's New Japan Pro Wrestling, it's WWE. Those are the matches that are getting people's attention, because most people watch those promotions, or at least aware of those promotions, and when good stuff happens, they'll go and watch. For a match like Stardom to gain the momentum to crack the top 5, I think is really impressive.
Yeah, 100%. We also have Noah also making the top 25 at least two years in a row, obviously. The big no match, it's kind of interesting. You said like you didn't want to vote for the Shingo Ospreay match, put that in your list, like sort of 2 of those matches in that list. It's the Nakajima and Keno matches are pretty much locked together in this list. And so I think people are kind of going the opposite of sort of your feelings there, that people kind of just at a wash, and they just kind of put those matches in like a similar type of order, and they pretty much finished like pretty much next to each other. And so there was the October Nakajima and Keno match, and people voted for the N1 final. I think that was the one that finished higher, and that was the November Noah match. And so again, Noah, that's again, you're sort of telling the story there, that they are at least the big matches are getting a lot of attention for Noah. Of course, they had the New Japan sort of co-show there. it wasn't met with great reviews, but still you are seeing this forward momentum for Noah, sort of getting these top 25 placings, 2 years in a row.
Yeah, and it comes down to like buzz is really important with this list. I think the Utami versus Shuri match, I think that was the first Stardom match many people watched for the first time.
Yep.
Because it got a lot of buzz beyond the normal Joshi circle. If you're in a Joshi Discord, or you're listening to a podcast that covers Japanese wrestling and talks about Joshi, you knew about Utami versus Shuri. You probably knew it was going to be a great match before it even happened. But for a lot of people, it was, a big thing with that match was that it was mentioned on Wrestling Observer Radio, with Dave and Brian, which obviously has a large, readership, especially, or listenership, especially amongst like the voting block. And a big thing with that match and the way it was discussed on Wrestling Observer Radio was like, they talked about it like 3 or 4 episodes in a row, because one was like, Dave was like, we got to watch this match. I heard it's incredible. And then the next episode, Dave was like, this match was incredible. And he talked like for 20 minutes about it. And then the next episode, Brian was like, I just watched the match and he talked 20 minutes about it. So it was like almost like this whole week where if you listen to, Wrestling Observer Radio, throughout the week, but it's like, you would feel like everyone was talking about this match. And I think that helped a lot with its footprint. And I think it really helped. It's probably really didn't. It probably didn't lead to a bunch of new Stardom World subscriptions or something like that. But I do think that was in that match was kind of the start of Stardom gaining more prominence within the wrestling hardcore audience, as opposed to just being this thing that Joshi fans really cared about.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you also had like Tom Lawler. He was talking about a bunch on Twitter. And of course, Tom Lawler did a show with Brian Alvarez for Wrestling Observer and some shots. Brian had to watch that for that show he does with Tom, so he could talk about it with him. And so that's how Brian got into that. And of course, Dave, he gave it like 5.5 stars, and that was like the most he gave for a women's match in over like 25 years or something like that. It was like Manami Toyota match from like in the 90s. That was the last time he gave a star rating that high. And so obviously, with the star ratings, they're subjective, but they are very polarizing as well in terms of the way Dave rates matches. And I guess in that sort of line there, it's kind of interesting that with GCW, they are also gaining a lot of forward momentum. They had the Hammerstein show. I guess just for transparency's sake, if anyone listens to the Voices of Wrestling flagship podcast, Rich Craich and Joe Lanza, the host of that podcast, they are very open that they are not big GCW fans. They do respect the forward momentum they are gaining. I think we're sort of the same opinion as well, Jesse, that we do respect the GCW, the business that they are doing, but we are not the biggest fans of that promotion in terms of the matches. And you kind of see that here as well. Like the GCW matches, I think there's only a small handful, maybe 2 or 3 GCW matches that made the list in terms of the top 100, at least maybe just 1 or 2, I believe. Forgive me, I forget about that. But still, GCW's promotion may be gaining a lot of forward momentum, but the matches themselves, I think the Cardona and Nick Gage match was the one that rated highest for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, and part of the thing with GCW is that their biggest matches are not going to necessarily be like high quality in ring stuff.
Yep.
Their most popular stuff is more character driven, more storyline driven, and it's death match, which is going to be a niche. And some people are like, I'm absolutely not going to watch that. Just the way it is. Some people are like that with women's wrestling. Like, I'm not going to watch a women's wrestling match. Like,
yep.
So I think, and that's part of that is that it's not going to have a universal appeal to everybody. And, match quality, this is about match quality. Like WWE does not do well on this list, even though they have by far the largest, footprint in wrestling. We see this one WWE match in this top 10, and it's a WWE UK, NXT UK match. So it's like not even like a real like main roster match. So even though they have that large footprint, they just don't do well because their shows are not about having awesome matches. And I wish that they were to an extent, but that's not what they're trying to do, and they're not very successful at it if they do try. So and so it's not necessarily totally reflective on like the wrestling business as a whole, but it does kind of show what people are into and what is gaining some traction in it. The last thing I'll say about this top 10 here is my number one was Kota Abushi versus Jay White, which finished 7th, which I think is a good place because I think a lot of people were polarizing with that match. A lot of people thought it was too long. A lot of people thought it was over dramatic. I thought it was really impressive and it hit just right. I'm kind of a sucker for Wrestle Kingdom matches. I tend to vote for them number one pretty much every year. Something, I don't know why. I mean, obviously the matches are always great, but it's sometimes, I don't know if it's about the big stage, adds a little bit of value to it on my end. And you'll see that in the list, like matches that main evented really big shows end up, feeling, doing really well. The Kenny Omega versus Bryan Danielson match, obviously that was the Arthur Ashe, AEW Grand Slam show at the, their largest crowd in history. And it was not the main event, it was the opening match, but it is the signature match from that show. Obviously that finishing number 2 kind of tells you, how it helps to have that big stage to do it on. And the last thing I wanted to mention was this Thunder Rosa versus Dr. Britt Baker match. A really interesting match. I believe it won the PWI Match of the Year award. And a lot of people were talking about it as potential match of the year. To me, it's not a match of the year candidate based on work, but the match was so interesting because we hadn't had a match on regular TV between women that was so violent, that had, so much blood and thumbtacks and all of this stuff. It was a really riveting viewing experience. I think all of these matches, the number one match and all these matches in the top 10 are very similar. They're these epic, long wars between singles wrestlers. And the Thunder Rosa versus Dr. Britt Baker was like a plunder match between 2 women in the main event of a TV taping. That to me makes it really interesting. And I think that kind of, again, that uniqueness helps it stand out when it comes to this list. Is you want to be unique. You want to be a match that stands out. You don't want to be like the Will Ospreay versus Shingo matches, which are great, but they're also kind of the same match. You want to be that different curveball kind of style of match. And we'll see that as we get further into the list, kind of matches that you wouldn't maybe conventionally think of as match of the year candidates, at least I wouldn't, that end up doing quite well.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of significance to that match as well. It was really a breakout for Britt Baker and even for Thunder Rosa as well. And, I think a lot of outside factors play into that as well with AEW. They've been for a long time, it could even argue since the start of the promotion, they've been criticized for their handling of the women's division. And, there's just the fact that they could do a little bit more with it. We've sort of talked about that as well. Like even just like the bare minimum of like, hey, do more vignettes, give these women more promo time, in various places, do more like these videos and all that there. And, we see a women's match, kind of main event. I mean, it's considered a lights out match. And so I guess it was unsanctioned. But yeah, part of that persona of AEW, right? The blood and guts persona, all of that there comes into light here. But still, both women were very much praised for their performances here. And I agree with you. It didn't make, I wouldn't say it was my top 10 as well, but I can understand for a lot of people the significance, all the outside significance, that it adds a lot more to the match. And I think you can say the same with another match that didn't make the top 10 but made the top 25, was the WrestleMania match between Bianca Bellar and Sasha Banks. The first time that 2 Black women main evented WrestleMania WrestleMania itself, for night 1. And I think for a lot of people, the match was a very good match in the ring, but also, adds a lot more of the historical significance as well. And so I think for a lot of people that really added that there to make it, at least, top 15 at the highest.
Yeah, finishing 14th, really high. It's a really interesting match. I think what you said is totally a factor. I think the match was very significant for a number of fans. I think being at WrestleMania main event, gives it a natural platform where if you have a good match in that spot, people will rave about it more than if you have a good match like on an episode of SmackDown. I think that it also benefited from just like a really weak, this was like a really weak year for outstanding WWE matches. I think the main roster doesn't have many of them, to be frank. NXT used to be kind of like the beacon for really good matches, but NXT was, I think, poor during the first half of last year and then totally scrapped and revamped during the second half of last year. So NXT is no longer kind of this place where you get the great matches. I think it's telling that NXT UK was the only one that had one in the top 10. And I think this Banks and Bellar match benefited from that, in the sense that if you wanted to have a WWE match, or if you only watch a few promotions and you look at WWE, you'd be like, this is the most memorable match, I think, from 2021, if you're from WWE. And, having the big platform at WrestleMania, having it feel like a historical moment to fans, I think that carries it. I thought it was a good match. I gave it 4 stars at the time. It wasn't like a match of the year contender to me. And when people were saying that, like, oh, I think that's match of the year, I'm like, no, it's definitely not match of the year. But I do think in some ways, it benefits from kind of a lack of internal competition, which I think hurts, I think particularly AEW and New Japan Pro Wrestling when it comes to, kind of cannibalize each other. Just look at going down to the a couple other interesting ones. Number 11 would be the Kenny Omega versus Adam Page match. That would be the title swap from Full Gear. Number 12 is Shingo versus Jeff Cobb from the second night of Wrestle Kingdom last year. That was one where everyone was going 5 stars after that, and Dave was saying it was 5 stars. I thought it was a really good match. It wasn't, to me, like an incredible 5-star match. I thought it was a really strong singles match at Wrestle Kingdom, but that's one that I wouldn't have had in my top 10, but obviously it did very well. Do you have any thoughts on that match whatsoever?
Nothing much. Just, I agree with you. It was a very good match. Maybe like 4.5. I think I think that's what I gave it at the time. And
that's what I gave it.
It was close to a top 10 match for me, but I think 12 is a really good spot there. Really good match, but nothing really, like not a match of the year contender.
So number 13, I think, is really interesting. It's CM Punk versus Eddie Kingston, also from AEW Full Gear. And this is, I think, something really cool about AEW, and we've seen it in recent weeks as something else, is that AEW peaks in different ways for different fans. And that the peak of AEW can, especially when it comes to like, what is the best match in AEW? What is your favorite match in AEW? It can kind of vary from person to person based on what your style preference is. And AEW tries to cater to those different preferences. I think you look at just so far in 2022, you could say, okay, what is AEW's best match in 2022? You could say it was the Hangman Page versus Bryan Danielson match, which is a very specific type, classic world title defense style match, and they did the territory style, you had the blood and you had all that. You have the Sammy Guevara versus Cody Rhodes ladder match, which is your spot fest, crazy moves, matches that you're going to be watching GIFs and highlights of over and over again. You could say the CM Punk versus MJF match, which is your big heat kind of match where the heel wins and you do the false finish, and they're so different. And I think it really plays into, I think it helps AEW do well on this list because the matches are so different and they're peaking in different ways. If you like high flyers, they're going to have like one of the best high flying matches. If you like bloody, plunder matches, they're going to have some of the best bloody and plunder matches. You want an old school 70s territory style blood feud match, they're going to have some of the best versions of that. You want tag matches, they're going to have some of the best tag matches. They have such a great variety of styles, and their roster has so many people that know how to work in these different ways that I think it helps them a lot when it comes to this list, because their top matches don't necessarily feel the same. They feel very different. And it's easy to cobble together a top 10 of just AEW matches and have them all be like totally different matches. I think it's a little bit harder in New Japan, because New Japan has a similar output of number of great matches in totality to AEW, but they're way more conservative in the style of matches they have. They're not going to have, all these gimmick matches. They're not going to have really like tag matches at the same level. But obviously there's differences between like a great Hiromu match and a great Tomohiro Ishii match, stylistically. But to me, AEW just has such great variety, and it peaks in different ways depending on what your preference is, and can kind of be that promotion for everyone in a way that I think other promotions can't be, because they're more rigid in the kind of style that they produce.
Yeah, it definitely goes back to the marketing of AEW, right? They always marketed themselves as an alternative. Alternative, obviously, they're reference to WWE, and I think the frustrations with WWE comes from watching AEW, right? The idealized version of WWE is kind of close to AEW. Like, we see that WWE could easily do what AEW is doing, but the style is catered to one man, Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon has a very specific way he wants wrestling, and the talent just tries to do that. But if there was a little bit more free reign, like we're seeing in AEW, you could obviously see that there's the ingredients are there for really good output for WWE. All the talents we saw in the Royal Rumble. People wanted Sasha Banks have a much more highlighted sort of outshowing in the Royal Rumble. Bianca Belair, the botching of her sort of rise in stardom. We can definitely see that the opposite of that in AEW, where they're actually handling their stars a lot more better and a more idealized version of that. And I think we're sort of seeing that come for AEW, where I think originally, a lot of people, they see Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks, they come from New Japan, they come from the indie style, and I think people are expecting that. But I think the real version of AEW is what we're seeing now, where, like you said, you can have the 70s territory type of match, you can have the plunder type of match, or you can just have, the classic heel heat kind of match. Their goal is to bring like you said, a little bit of everything for everyone. If you don't like the Young Bucks for whatever reason, we'll give you MJF, we'll give you CM Punk, Hook, we have all this here. And I think that is sort of the idealized goal for AEW, is this variety of matches.
Yeah, in some ways, I think it works against them to an extent, where I feel like people, especially when AEW started, they all had their idealized version of AEW was going to be the promotion that was going to be what I think is missing in wrestling personally. And if it's something else, I'm going to be mad. So you got all people getting mad, like, I don't like that this is a gimmick comedy promotion. That's kind of Bryan Danielson's promo from this week, which was based on you got, a guy thinks he's a dinosaur and he's the tag team champion. And, in some ways, I think that it worked against them in the sense that fans got turned off because AEW wasn't exactly what they wanted it to be, as opposed to being this, this promotion trying to service all of these different elements. But I think as a fan of just quality professional wrestling, not having a strong preference based on style, it's obviously great to have. And I wanted to kind of direct attention to the CM Punk versus Eddie Kingston match that finished 13th, because it's not a match that conventionally would finish very high on this list. But because of the personalities and the storytelling, and they just went out there and said, we're going to have a short, fun brawl, and the crowd is going to be hot, and they're going to like both of these people. It ends up capturing fans in a way that some of these epic, sweeping 50-minute or 30-minute plus matches just don't get. And a lot of fans can, and I appreciate, this is not a match that made my top 10. It wasn't a match that I really considered for my top 10, but I can really appreciate the fans who are like, this is the kind of wrestling I like. Is I don't need it to be this huge, epic, dramatic affair. I just want to have two dudes fighting, and and I want a hot crowd. And so I like the kind of diversity that was brought to the table in AEW, and it's kind of being reflected in a match like this finishing so high, as opposed to just being like, oh, here's a 26-minute G1 match between, Tanahashi and Naito, which, look, I love those matches. Like, I'm not trying to hate on those matches, but I don't want to be like harping on like that one specific match. I just like the versatility and diversity that AEW has brought to the table.
Yeah, it's definitely refreshing that, like, matches don't need to be, an hour long. We don't need 60-minute draws every week or every month. Matches can be very short. They can be 10 minutes, they can be 20 minutes. They don't need to be these, like you said, 50-minute epics. We don't need, a 30-minute draw to prove that, oh, these two are really good wrestlers. Like, that's the quality, that's the aspect of a really good wrestler, that you can be given whatever time you have and you can still deliver a good match. And we saw that here, CM Punk and Eddie Kingston, that, no matter what time they were given, they're going to put on a quality match. And, definitely the build for Punk and Kingston helps out this match as well, with really good build. And, what I would argue is a very good payoff as well with the end of the Punk Kingston match.
Yeah, and it speaks to what people, because some people will argue that, like, I don't care about match quality, I care about stories.
Sure.
And that I don't care if this match got 5 stars, or I don't care if this match won match of the year or placed well in a match of the year poll. I just want like entertainment and charisma and stories. But that's connected with quality matches. And I think that's reflected in this CM Punk and Eddie Kingston match finishing so well. And you can even point to the Kenny Omega versus Bryan Danielson match, or the Young Bucks versus Lucha Brothers matches. Those are matches that had stories to them and had long rivalries setting up feuds and things like that to them. And that is why I think they are, finishing so well, is because, especially CM Punk versus Eddie Kingston, because if you took 2 guys and they mimicked every single thing CM Punk and Eddie Kingston did in this match, people would not be clamoring for it as a great match. It's because of the story and the personalities and how the crowd felt hot into their fight. And it's all related. You can't just be like, I only care about stories, I don't care, I could care less about match quality. It's like, you can't have a real high quality match without at least having some kind of investment from the fans into the results of the match or the personalities involved. And I think that's one of the reasons WWE, has fared so poorly on this list, because they're from a storytelling perspective, their matches just aren't there. And so fans, you can have where the work is very good, but if the fans aren't really that invested in the match, it's not going to rate that highly, because when it comes down to filling out this ballot at the end of the year, you don't have any emotional connection to them. And I think that's a big deal. And I think it's something that's kind of missed when people hand wave like match quality sometimes, because they think like, oh, it's not what's really important. What's important is drawing money and being entertaining. And it's like, well, your matches have to be ultimately good and entertaining for the storytelling to take place, or for you to draw any money with them. And I think that's kind of lost, and kind of like a misconception when it comes to like praising matches. And again, I like to use this Punk and Eddie Kingston match as an example, because it's not your indie spot fest. It's not your guy doing crazy moves or someone almost dying because they did something super dangerous. It's a match based around storytelling and the personalities involved.
Yeah, I mean, we even see here, like you're showing, like in the description, that this person, Ed Mills, wrote, like, Eddie Kingston was a cult hero on the indies. Like, he is someone that if you watch indie wrestling, you have seen an Eddie Kingston match at least one point in your life. Whether it's Chikara, whether it's just some obscure indie promotion, you've seen an Eddie Kingston match if you followed indie wrestling over the past 5 or 10 years. And so with that, he is finally getting his chance in AEW, and obviously he's talked about that many times as well. And so there's a reason to care about Eddie Kingston. Going back to that Sasha Banks Bianca Belair match. Bianca Belair won the Royal Rumble. She is on this rise to stardom, and so there's this reason to care about her, because WWE, are they actually gonna be successful in creating a new star? At least for that moment, they kind of were, but in the months later on, they kind of botched that in SummerSlam, and which is why, like you said, we've kind of harped on this many times, that WWE, there's no reason to care about their stars, because Roman Reigns is just going to win the next match, or Brock Lesnar is just going to get the title next anyway, or Goldberg, he'll just come in and do Goldberg things.
Well, and Bianca will struggle to hit that level again, because fans have now been taught that even if she wins this match, even if she wins the title at WrestleMania, it doesn't mean that she's going to be presented as a star in the future. And so it's going to be hard. Once the genie's out of the bottle, once you kind of expose what the real philosophy is behind booking somebody, it's hard to kind of get that emotional investment again. I think they'll struggle to hit that ceiling and make people care about Bianca as much as they did at WrestleMania. And therefore the match probably isn't going to be that good. This is still an Eddie Kingston and CM Punk match. This is written by Ashutosh Dubey. I definitely mispronounced that name, so I apologize. But he says right here, at this point, I've aired my grievances about unnecessarily long matches and wrestling enough. And matches like this show exactly why long isn't what matters. They accomplished in 11 minutes what most wrestlers struggle to do in 30. And that's kind of my point, is that like a fast 11-minute match can appeal to certain fans in a way that maybe like a match like the Danielson versus Hangman Page matches didn't at the same level. And they really enjoy seeing the kind of sprint and kind of action. And that's one of the things I'm really impressed by that match's placement on the list and kind of what it says about wrestling fans in general and kind of the people who are voting on this. Just scroll up really quick, see if there's anything. Stop me if you think any of these things are interesting. We already kind of talked about Katsuhiko Najima and Kano finishing the number 15. That's the highest placed Noah match on this list. And right after that is Katsuhiko Najima. I don't know why I just pronounced that terribly. Katsuhiko Nakajima versus Kano. I didn't vote for either of those matches in the top 10. God bless the people who were able to parse out which one they thought was better. But very similar to the Will Ospreay versus Shingo match. Almost more similar in a sense because those guys have such a straightforward style, which is that they're just going to kick the shit out of each other at both times, as opposed to Ospreay and Takagi. There's, because of the speed that they work at, so maybe a little bit variance, but it helps to see. Now, and almost like if you're not a fan of Noah and you see, those two matches finished back to back, I definitely want to, that's something you might want to check out. You got this match in October, and then you have this match in November. So you can watch kind of both of them back to back. And I can assure you that there's a lot of storytelling in between the two matches that makes it a worthwhile investment as far as watching the first one and then watching the second one, or watching their previous matches. We also got, this is the second Shuri versus Utami match from Stardom. This happened at only a few weeks ago, really, but at the very end of 2021. The rematch, this
is the third one.
This is the third one. What was the second one?
They had one at the 5-star Grand Prix.
Right. Oh, yes, they did. Yes. This is
the final of the trilogy.
Would you say this is the most hyped match in Stardom history? Maybe from outside interest?
For outside interest, probably, yeah. With everyone talking about the pay-per-view and all that, from my perspective, my very little knowledge and for very recent fandom, I would say in terms of outside interest, I think, yeah, definitely people are very interested in pay-per-view, seeing whether Shuri would actually win or not. I remember amongst the Joshi circles, it was a legitimate question whether she would actually finally beat Utami for the title in this show. Because it might not have been. They could have just used it to boost up Utami more as a champion. And so I think definitely for outside interest, probably very hyped.
Yeah, I mean the person right here, Niagara Driver, which I'm going to assume is not their real name, but they say right here, the main event at one of the biggest shows in Stardom history and in Joshi wrestling over the last 15 years. I mean, I've been in wrestling media pretty much for Stardom's entire existence. That show in December had by far the most kind of interest and hype for it than I can recall of any other Stardom show, really any other Joshi show. The only thing I can really compare it to would be like the Stardom matches at Wrestle Kingdom, because there was curiosity on that end, and obviously that's kind of leeching onto a bigger event, but that's a totally different situation. Bryan Danielson versus Eddie Kingston finishing 18th, very similar. I actually saw this match live because it happened in Boston at a Rampage taping. Internet connection is unstable. Hope that doesn't screw up the Zoom chat. We're back. We fixed it. But I saw this match live. I will say you're kind of off, Jesse. Oh shoot, really? How about, do I sound okay now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're very much I think it's because the page you're on is trying to load completely.
Yeah,
I think
so
it's cutting you off a lot.
yeah. So we're gonna hop out. If we have to hop back in, we will. But the Bryan Danielson versus Eddie Kingston match I was at live, and it was one of those matches that when I watched it live, I was like, this is a really good match. I'm really excited to see what people say about it when they see it live and in person, or when they see it on Rampage in a couple days. It was like kind of like I knew about it, how good it was, and nobody else did. But that similar kind of thing where it isn't this 5-star flips, it's not, I shouldn't say 5-star because that's such a subjective thing, but it's not flips. It's not 35 minutes long. It's just two guys beating each other up. They cut some great promos beforehand on each other to kind of get you interested in this match. It was, Bryan Danielson still kind of, I don't want to say figuring out himself in AEW because he came out guns blazing in AEW. So it's not like he was trying to learn, but he was kind of reestablishing himself as like, I am the best wrestler in the world. And this is why. And this was like, I remember watching it live, and Eddie Kingston was chopping Bryan Danielson in the corner. People are reasonably into the match, but he's chop, 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 chop. And then he just goes wham, and he chops him so hard, and it goes so loud, and just the crowd goes from like 6 to 9 when it comes to like how invested they are in the match. Like it's like you're watching, I'm like, yeah, chop him, chop him. And everyone goes, whoa! And everyone's like now like getting on their feet and stuff like that. It was a really surreal experience as a fan, just seeing like people just got it's an incredible concept, Jason. People getting really interested to guys hitting each other really hard. But it was a really fun match to watch live. I didn't have it in my top 10. It's sometimes I struggle to get out of the conventional thinking of a match needs to be 30 minutes. A match needs to have like massive stakes for me to consider it top 10. But it is the kind of fun match that you can show anyone who's maybe not a huge AEW fan or doesn't really know a ton about wrestling and maybe can get invested in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's kind of normal to sort of have that thinking. I think you see the same thing in traditional sports where like, oh, what's the best NFL game? Well, most of the top 10 or top 5 are going to be playoff games, or games that had the division on the line. Same thing with like NBA or NHL, any traditional sport, the games of high stakes are going to be ranked higher in terms of top 10 games of all time. I think wrestling is kind of the same way where like, this was a TV match and there wasn't really a title on the line. There wasn't really a lot of stakes, just more of, I guess just old school, just traditional, like, oh, I'm better than you kind of a thing, which is a very good story to tell. But yes, but for a lot of people, they probably wouldn't consider it their match of the year or top 10 matches of the year. But I agree with you, it's still a fantastic match. And like you said, Danielson wasn't really figuring things out in terms of getting his, feet back into the water outside WWE, but it really was kicking off this run for Danielson where like, oh, this is the Bryan Danielson we've been missing for these past couple of years. And he's been sort of being held back in WWE. And again, just more for Eddie Kingston, the breakout for him in terms of being a national TV star rather than just being this indie star.
Yeah, and Bryan Danielson is a really interesting figure on this list.
Yep.
Because over on Voice of Wrestling as well, Fred Morlan, aka Flagrant Stats on Twitter, he kind of compiled the results of the poll and came up with some data points. And he uses award shares, which is basically what he does is he gives each wrestler, if a wrestler appeared in a match that finished in the top 100, they get a point. In the higher up they finish, the higher up their match is finished, the more points they get. So it's kind of like tying individual wrestlers to how well their matches performed on this list. He said Bryan Danielson, he was the number one individual point scorer basically on this list. And by a healthy margin, he finished with an award share of 0.837, and Kenny Omega was second with 0.522. So I don't know what the math is on that, maybe like 25 or 30% higher than the next closest person when it comes to just like the amount of matches they're in. And, we've already talked about Danielson versus Omega and Danielson versus Eddie Kingston. The Danielson versus Minoru Suzuki match finished quite high. There was a match he had against Roman Reigns. I think that was the SmackDown match that finished very high as well, or relatively high on that list. he's just a guy, his Miro match placed on the list. And it's a really impressive run for someone. Like we talked about how WWE kind of handicaps you because the storytelling element often isn't there, and they're rigid in their style, and they like to do crappy finishes that hurt, otherwise high quality matches. For someone to spend, half the year in WWE and to end up still having a dominant performance on this list, basically based on like a 4-month run from September to December. I mean, that's incredibly impressive for an individual wrestler. The Hangman Page Danielson match, obviously being another top 10 finishing match, the 60-minute draw, a really impressive run for somebody who was like only basically, he's kind of like a guy who like has an awesome season, but he only played in half the season. So you're not sure you can give him the MVP, even though he was clearly the best player that season. It's like it's a really like impressive performance from him. And, he would have to be considered the favorite to probably win a lot of awards in 2022 when it comes to things like Wrestler of the Year and Most Outstanding Wrestler, because now the shackles are off. He's going to be in AEW for the whole year. Who knows what he's going to do? He might end up going to New Japan, which obviously would probably increase his chances at having more great matches. He's definitely gonna. He has a chance. I'll say this. I wouldn't say I was a Bryan Danielson disrespecter before the last 4 or 5 months, but I found him a little bit overrated. Like I found his Ring of Honor work at the start of his career a little bit overrated. I'm a Nigel guy for starters. I like Nigel McGuinness more than I like Bryan Danielson, or I did in Ring of Honor. And never have I said he's not great, but I was always like a little bit overrated. And people were saying like, oh, who do you think is better? Who's had a better career, Kenny Omega or Bryan Danielson? And I'll be like, oh, Kenny Omega, it's not even close. Bryan Danielson spent almost 10 years in WWE where he was always going to be handicapped by what he could do. But with that being said, he's had an unbelievable performance in the end of 2021, and he's already been unbelievable in 2022. He's already had a match of the year contender. He's probably going to have many, many more. But a really impressive run from Bryan Danielson that has changed my opinion on him, a little bit. Like I said, I've always thought he was great, so it's hard for me to think that he's that much better. But I was a little bit of a Bryan Danielson skeptic beforehand, but he's just been absolutely terrific and really only reached, he's really only just scratching the surface of what he could do in AEW, and certainly what he could do if he were to work for like New Japan.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of on a different spectrum that you are. That Bryan Danielson is probably ranks as one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, and so that's part of where I come from on this. Nigel McGuinness, I have a lot of respect for him as well. No disrespect to Nigel over there, who also spent time in WWE, though as a commentator, not as a wrestler. But yeah, I mean, Danielson, it's very interesting to see what he can do in a full year with this sort of shackles off, I guess you can call it. Potentially working in New Japan. He hasn't worked in many indies. I don't know whether that's something he desires to do. Obviously, he's had interviews before while in WWE. He's wanted to work CMLL or at least in Arena Mexico in some type of way. And so at least when he was in WWE, he had this desire to do a lot in the ring. And so I don't know whether, obviously with travel restrictions, that may play a part in that. He's definitely has a family as well. And so maybe he doesn't want to do too much traveling outside of AEW. And so that maybe that could play a factor in for him as well. But yeah, this past year, 2021, I mean, just to have, I think the triple threat match ranked pretty decently at WrestleMania, that was on the list, and to have more matches after that with AEW is pretty incredible. And started off hot with that Kenny Omega match with Arthur Ashe, and just has continued that momentum even till now. It's really impressive, and it's something you don't really see that often. Usually guys when they leave, especially people who love WWE, they've had some road bumps along the way. Danielson hasn't really had that. You see Aleister Black and even Miro, those guys, they were pretty slow at the jump when they left WWE and entered AEW. Andrade, you can add him as well. It's kind of interesting to see that Danielson right away just came in just on fire from the start, and has continued that momentum for the next couple months into 2021.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see. There's so much you can do with him. That was like the thing even before he was in. We talked about it before where he even came to AEW. Just like Bryan Danielson versus literally anybody is intriguing, especially in AEW where they're going to allow him to work and do what he wants to do, and he's not going to be limited by various constraints. And so, like, yes, Bryan Danielson versus. Bryan Danielson versus Kenny Omega, Bryan Danielson versus Hangman Page, or his match with Jon Moxley. Okay, all that stuff sounds great, but for hardcore fans, like Bryan Danielson versus Daniel Garcia, Bryan Danielson versus Jungle Boy, Bryan Danielson versus Darby Allin, all these various people up and down the card are really exciting. Who knows? And it does seem like he almost has like a limitless ceiling of great matches he could do, especially because he has the freedom to work outside AEW if he wants. He could go to New Japan. He could probably go to Mexico. He's talked about that in the past. We've seen AEW guys obviously go to Mexico and work and win titles. So it's one of those things, like I'm just looking at kind of like the promotional summary that they have here for all the matches. I mean, GCW does have 3 matches that finished in the top 100, which is not bad. I mean, a lot of promotions have less, so I wouldn't say it's totally disrespectful to like how successful it's been, but it's been, it's Nick Gage versus Matt Cardona, which is like that heat, super hot match that everyone saw with the bottles and everything like that. Alex Colon versus Atticus Kogar, which is a death match. That is probably my guess is that's the highest placing true death match. And they also have the Arez Black Taurus and Gringo Loco versus Aramis, Dragon Bane, and Laredo Kid from WrestleMania weekend. So they're represented. AEW has 17 matches that place in the top 100, which is a lot, and I think mostly it speaks to their platform. WWE, I'm going to just do a quick count right here. So WWE has 7 matches in the top 10 or top 100, which I would say it's not particularly high. That's not counting NXT though, so maybe it's a little bit different.
Okay.
But the highest ranking WWE main roster match is Sasha Banks versus Bianca Belair, which we already talked about. Then the Roman Reigns and Daniel Bryan singles match coming in at number 40. The Roman Reigns Daniel Bryan Edge match at WrestleMania, which is number 42. I would never vote for that match. I get some people only watch WWE. I thought that match was fine. I didn't think it was great. I thought the finish was lame and anticlimactic. I'd be surprised. I was surprised it finished as well as it did. Edge versus Seth Rollins. I know that's from the Saudi Arabia show, which a lot of people don't watch, but by pretty much all accounts, that was the best match on WWE's main roster all year. I mean, I believe that got the highest rating from Dave Meltzer. It was all everyone said was that it was the best Hell in a Cell match in years. It was the best WWE main roster match all year. I'm a little surprised that finished 49th and not a little bit higher. If you were to ask me, what was the standout best pure quality match for WWE last year, I probably would have said that one. It's interesting to me that one is only 49th. Any thoughts on WWE matches?
Definitely, I think maybe the platform, would that be a Saudi show? Like we mentioned it in our last episode, that most people kind of take a stance on those shows and just don't watch them. I think maybe that could be it. I think I don't know if cause there are a lot of contenders for top 10, and so maybe that was it. I think more people favored that Bianca Belair Sasha Banks match more than this Edge Seth Rollins match, especially in terms of significance. I think maybe that people were playing sort of that factor, like you said earlier. People have different sort of strategies in terms of playing their top 10. I don't know if people wanted to really highlight this Edge Seth Rollins match, which was it was good, but isn't really that good a top 10 kind of a match, or anything higher than that. or even close to that, top 20, top 25. I don't think he will really go that far, even though, yeah, at the time, I did get a lot of praise, especially from people like Dave Meltzer.
Yeah, just looking at, NXT only put one main roster match or one proper NXT match. In the countdown, it was number 92. It was Johnny Gargano versus Kushida from, I think, February.
Okay.
That seems like a pretty big fall from grace. I went back really quick. I just looked at like 2016, which in 2016, NXT had the number 3 overall match, which would be the Revival versus DIY. They had the number 4 overall match, which is Shinsuke Nakamura versus Sami Zayn. They had the number 14th overall match, which was the Revival versus DIY again. So like, it just seems like you can kind of look at kind of how there's been a bit of a fall from grace for NXT, which we've talked about at length on this show, and everyone I think is keenly aware of at this point. But is obviously something that is reflected in this poll, which is that NXT, which was once this hub for great wrestling, just isn't there anymore, and doesn't seem like I'm very dubious it will be coming back. And I am curious to know, like, will there be long-term implications on like WWE's ability to place on this list, getting away from NXT and getting away from hiring the indie wrestlers that were having really good matches, with a focus on greener talent that are supposed to be getting over their personalities and their whatever their various strange gimmicks are. And if again, kind of highlights the decline of interest I think a lot of people are having in WWE.
Yeah, so sort of just thinking about it, like WWE's big shows so far have been Day One and Royal Rumble, and even out of those shows, no one's really hyping up any matches from there. Even the Rumble matches, people were kind of just like, oh, they were pretty lame and pretty lackluster compared to like AEW New Japan. Of course, Wrestle Kingdom always rates highly, and of AEW, they've had not really big shows in terms of pay-per-views, but they've had they had the TNT special that they had, but they still had some big shows in terms of Dynamites, and people are already talking about big matches from there, and so it's pretty interesting run out for early 2022.
Yeah, I mean, I think the men's Royal Rumble is going to get, and maybe the women's Royal Rumble too. I think those are going to get some worst match of the year considerations.
Yeah, possibly.
So I don't think we're, I don't know, because like I said, unless with the exception of the occasional Roman Reigns match, and it's telling that out of the matches that did place well in WWE, that did place in the top 100 or whatever, a lot of them were Roman Reigns matches, and I don't necessarily think that's because Roman Reigns is like this amazing worker and having all these great matches. I think it's because Roman is the only person that fans feel worthy of emotional investment, because he's the only one booked like that. So outside of those matches, it's kind of hard for me to think, like, even someone like, I think like Becky Lynch, who at one time was super popular with the fans and fans were going to have emotional reactions to. I think it's looking pretty grim right now with her, as far as the ability to have that match that really captures the imagination of the audience because of this forced heel run. And I just don't know, like, even you have so many good wrestlers on WWE, like you can have AJ Styles and Drew McIntyre and Kevin Owens and Seth Rollins, but I think a lot of those guys are going to end up having, like, those guys have like 3.5 to 4-star matches. They're not necessarily guys who are going to be putting matches in the top 25 because they're not really pushed that way. And I think that's a big thing. It's like I said, it's not a coincidence that out of the matches in the top 10, pretty much all of them were main event matches, or considered like main event level matches. They're not like a match third from the top or something like that. So I think utilization of talent is key when it comes to putting together good matches. It's really not about like how good someone is in the ring in a lot of cases. As odd as it sounds to say that, like when it comes to having a top tier match, it's not. Like Eddie Kingston is a good example. Who I don't think Eddie Kingston is like a elite level worker, but yet he's placing very highly because he's able to get emotional investment in his matches, which again kind of ties back into my original point that like you can't have great matches without the storytelling and personality involved, and it's hard for WWE to do that.
Yeah, and even just recently with Eddie Kingston, Gabriel Kidd, people are already raving about that match, and that was just a very simple New Japan Strong match, but people are already raving about it as being a fantastic match. And I mean, it does look pretty bleak right now with the direction WWE is going. Goldberg is set to come back, of course. Ronda Rousey, she's looking pretty rusty, and she hasn't really brought a lot in terms of in-ring stuff. And I don't really see a lot of fan interest in her, even just in terms of hating her. Like, I don't like, people just have no reaction to Ronda Rousey because she hasn't really been relevant for like 10 or so years. Yeah, especially since she's retired from mixed martial arts. Like, there's no reason to. She has no, people just don't really care about Ronda Rousey anymore. UFC has kind of moved on from her as well. Like, she's a legend at UFC, but still, like, the current fighters they have now are much better than her, even at her peak.
Yeah, and that's one of the interesting aspects is that Rousey, and especially because she's going to be around, I guess, for the whole year, is the scoop on that and her contract. She'll be she's going to get that WrestleMania main event. I think she'll probably main event night one, probably against Charlotte.
Yep.
That's what it looks like. And that will be like we talked about Bianca and Sasha probably getting a nice bump from the being in the WrestleMania main event and people easily remembering that match. And that probably helped it out in the voting. They're going to put Ronda Rousey in that position. I don't know if the magic's going to work that time. And that's, again, like, she's going to get put in these prominent spots, just like Roman Reigns, where a lot is going to be dedicated to getting her over and making her matches feel really important. I don't know if she's up to the quality challenges of producing like a match of the year contender. I don't know if her heart's in it anymore. So that's another thing where it's just like, okay, who's the few people that they're actually going to push? Like, and Brock is the same way. Like, they push Brock. Brock's not a guy who's going to have match of the year contenders. He'll do that one match a year where he wrestles like a smaller guy and he like sells for that guy, like he did for AJ Styles or Daniel Bryan, and that match is always awesome. But for the most part, he's going to be in and out doing 5 or 10 minute matches where he tosses some guys around and has these sprints, which people will find entertaining in their own way. I think they've gotten a little bit old, especially when that's just been the go-to formula for so many different opponents, whether he's wrestling Reigns or he's wrestling Goldberg or he's wrestling The Undertaker or whatever the motive is, or his opponent. I just think that's a really interesting thing to look at going forward. Is like WWE has these big matches, but they're dedicating their main events to people who are probably not going to produce match of the year quality stuff. They're probably not going to continue to do well on this list.
Yeah, even just like story wise as well, and just in ring stuff, like even story wise, like people are kind of fatigued with the Roman Reigns Brock Lesnar feud, and that looks like to be the direction they go in WrestleMania. Mentioned it before, like, yeah, Ronda Rousey, Charlotte, people are kind of fatigued with Charlotte as well, and so like, who's the face and who's the heel in that program? Like, it's a very difficult situation that WWE has put themselves in, that they're forcing themselves in. Well, I guess no one's really forcing them, but they want to do that because they think that's a big match. But I think they're mistaken in that aspect. But I could be wrong. Maybe people will more up to Rousey. Maybe Rousey's holding something back. I highly doubt that. So that seems like a 1% probability. But that seems like the direction they're going in.
Yeah, I mean, it's still early on I'm not quite ready. Well, in a few weeks, maybe I will be, but I'm not quite ready to bury dirt on the Ronda Rousey train yet. I think she's off to a less than. I'm not optimistic about it, but I don't think it's totally dead yet with her. I think that, some people will say like WWE, like, oh, well, WWE is going to be, this is a bunch of like media hardcore fans. They're not going to vote for WWE. I think WWE still has a huge advantage. They have by far the largest platform for people to see. They have the matches that get the most hype just based on public interest, because God, like, if there is a great match in WWE, you will never hear the end of it because people will be talking about it all the time. So I do feel like they still have an advantage on that end, but I think it speaks to the quality and their ability to put a ceiling on their very talented roster that they're finishing so poorly, relatively to scale, especially when you consider the amount of content that they have. They produce way more wrestling matches than any other promotion. So, they should be doing, should have more match of the year contenders not to mention how accessible everything is.
Yeah, I think that's the big problem with WWE, right? If they're more focused on putting out content rather than putting on a good show, yeah, like that's really the biggest problem. Like they are the content machine. They'll hype that up in conference calls. That's hey, we have X number of videos out on Peacock, and we are bringing in this number of subscribers. But they don't really talk about how well these shows are. They'll just talk about the business of the shows and business of their programs rather than just any sort of quality, which it sometimes goes hand in hand. I mean, I guess not for WWE. They're still doing record profits, record revenue, despite very poor quality. But still, it could come back to haunt them with very poor quality. Though, like you said, they have a very dedicated fan base, and so fans will hype up WWE even if they put on a good match, but not a great match.
Yeah, like an AEW has the same benefits where AEW's content is really accessible. So anytime something good happens to AEW, you can watch it. It doesn't matter where it happens. I mean, it happens on TV, obviously. It happens on Dark or Dark Elevation. It can be easier to find that stuff. And that's an advantage. I think it goes to show like how a promotion like Stardom can do pretty well on this list, given that the best way to watch Stardom is subscribing to this service that not a lot of people are going to subscribe to. And so it goes to show kind of like, I guess, strength that some of those smaller promotions that are able to do well, despite not having the most accessible content, and it hurts, it hurts a lot of promotions. It hurts basically any, pro promotion. It hurts independent wrestling, because if you don't have an IWTV subscription or you don't buy something on Fight, you then don't really get to see it. And so there's a lot that goes on there that I think plays a role in accessibility and stuff like that. Is there anything else that we didn't get to, Jason, that you wanted to mention based on the list that we have?
No, there's nothing really much else. Like I'm just sort of reiterating what you said. Like I think the access to some of these matches definitely plays a part in that. Like Ice Ribbon. I think that gets. Like I saw some of those matches make it into the top 100. That's a very hard promotion to watch. I think you need to be subscribed to another service over there.
Mm-hmm.
It is sort of interesting that I think Gato Move got a shout there in the top 100. That's pretty accessible to watch. You can just watch that on YouTube. And so I think that definitely plays a part in that, of why that the Chris Brooks Lulu Pencil match can get into the top 100, because you can just watch it on YouTube.
Yeah, like Ice Ribbon, produce, they put 3 matches in the top 100, which is, okay, 3 out of 100 doesn't seem that big, but it's Ice Ribbon. Like that's a pretty impressive thing. All Japan Pro Wrestling didn't put 1 in the top 100. Yeah. So, well, Ice Ribbon did they not have stuff on YouTube? Because you used to be able to follow it okay on YouTube during my brief Ice Ribbon watching excursion a number of years ago.
Once in a while they'll put something on YouTube, but it's mostly just highlights of their shows.
Yeah, I really like Dragon Gate has started putting English commentary on YouTube. Like once a week they do like a little live stream. I think that it's like I don't know if it's always from Kurokan Hall, but they always do like a Kurokan Hall. And I've been finding myself just watching that, because I'm like, you watch it, it's like 25 minutes, it's like one main event level match. Usually like a big tag team match or something like that, and it makes it really easy to watch. And Dragon Gate's not an accessible promotion to watch. You got to get Dragon Gate World, which is not a good app to use, or you got to look for it pirated somewhere. And so that holds it back. Like you mentioned like Gato Move. Like it's really easy once a YouTube link. If you put something on YouTube and everyone can share it, it becomes pretty easy to watch. I think like I was a big advocate of the Utami versus Shuri match. So the one I think from June, like the big one, the one that finished 5th. That match, I thought that match should have been put on YouTube like a week after it happened, because everyone was talking about it. I don't know if you're going to get people to start subscribing to Stardom World because of that one match, if they haven't seen it already, but you put that match out on YouTube and say, this is what Stardom is all about. I think that would have been really prudent, at least from like my Western perspective of getting people invested in Stardom World, because I don't know if I'm seeing that. I'm not plunking down a subscription for a match I've never seen before, and that's my familiarity with Stardom. I'm plunking down money if I see an awesome match and say, oh, I want to see more of this. Or you get excited for the the rematch is coming up, and you're like, oh, I got to get Stardom World because I definitely want to see that rematch. And I don't know if they're going to put the second one on YouTube. I don't know. I think it's something that smaller, I'm sure they all consider it, but it's something I think smaller promotions should definitely like consider as a viable strategy to, when they get a match that gets a lot of buzz that, outside fans are going to tune in to watch. They're going to check it out.
Yeah, I think about a month after they put out their sort of TV show that they have in Japan, We Are Stardom. I think they featured that match there. But yeah, like you said, it was kind of a late out with a month. It's very interesting for indie promotions to do that. Obviously their stuff, most indie wrestling is kind of on IWTV or High Spots or Fights. I'm curious whether they've considered that as well, or just they want to get those subscription dollars or not, or they just want to encourage people to go to their shows. But I think indie wrestling, it's always kind of a debate whether like indie wrestling just put out some of their big matches on YouTube or not. I think the Daniel Garcia Wheeler Yuta, like that match ranked pretty highly for IWTV. They're like sort of 60-minute draw that they had. You can only watch it on IWTV. I don't think they ever put that on YouTube, but still, like I don't know if that's something they've ever considered, or whether it's something they should consider or not.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you look at that, like, because a lot of these, like, a big intrusive developed storyline to me is not gonna get me to watch a promotion I've never watched before. But if someone's like, you should watch this match, it's a 5-star match, I will watch it because I don't have to know as much going into the match. And I don't know, like the Utami versus Shuri match, kind of as a what I would describe as a very, very, very casual Stardom fan. I probably didn't like it as much as some other people who were like really into it and understood the rivalry and that kind of aspects of it. And so a lot of times when someone's telling me like, oh, you're going to love, this is the best match of the year, watch it, and then it's like, well, I don't know who these people are, so I think this match is kind of, and especially sometimes if you don't know who people are, you sometimes think, wait, people think, like, if you didn't know who Eddie Kingston or CM Punk are, which obviously most people would know who they are, but if you watched their match, you wouldn't see that was a match of the year candidate if you watched it and you didn't know who those people are. And that's kind of the same way if I'm popping into some Australian indie show or a Joshi promotion or some European indie or random American indie, and I don't know the story, I'm probably not going to have the same kind of reaction as people who are really invested in it are. But I do think it's a great way to get people into your product by just saying, here's a match that you'll enjoy if you like pro wrestling. I'm like, well, I like pro wrestling, I probably will enjoy it. But that's pretty much it for today. Appreciate everyone who keeps listening. This was a lot of fun. Again, I will link the description that will take you to the Voice of Wrestling site where you can peruse your list yourself. Again, credit to Rich Craich and everyone involved at the Voice of Wrestling team who put this together. I don't have any real role in that. I just fill out the ballot. But thanks a lot, everybody, and we will see you again in a couple of weeks.